Hi, this is Morley and this is the M-Wire. In this video, we are going to look at how the CDC has become America's landlord, halting evictions indefinitely. But before we get into that, first things first, a big shout out to my new subscribers. Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate the support. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel as it would greatly help support it. Thank you very much. So before we get into the CDC, let's get into the issue in general. I realize that a lot of people aren't working because of the pandemic and they don't have the means to pay their rent. Conversely, landlords have mortgages to pay and they need that revenue to pay their mortgage. So this is not a cut and dried issue by any means. But let's take a look at California, for instance. Like recently, Gavin Newsom has put an eviction moratorium, meaning that people can't be evicted from California. But however, California, as far as the virus numbers go, per capita I'm speaking of, it's relatively low compared to some other states. I think this solely falls on Gavin Newsom to open up the state more and let people work so they can have money to pay their rent. But I think Gavin Newsom is a little power hungry personally, and he likes the dominion that he has over the people of California. I mean, California has a big problem now with not just the virus, but the fires. So obviously, if people could be evicted from their homes, that would cause a serious problem, as much bigger than the virus itself with everything going on there. So I actually support Newsom's decision for a moratorium in California. But let's get into the CDC. I mean, who has vested the CDC with the power and the authority to have a moratorium on evictions nationwide? I'm sure landlords are asking that question as we speak, and I'm sure some of them are going to take legal action as to challenge their authority on this. And I mean, that's warranted. I mean, the CDC deciding this for the entire country makes about as much sense as your local grocery store deciding this for the entire country. I mean, this is not a cut and dried issue by any means, that the CDC has this type of authority. I think it should be done on a state-by-state basis, as per, the governor of that state. Personally, I don't think the CDC should be given sweeping authority. I mean, this is a little bit ridiculous, and I hate to say it, but there will always be that demographic of people that will abuse this, and they will use this to their own benefit, meaning that they have, the resources to pay their rent, yet they choose not to, knowing full well that they can't be evicted. Well, let's get into the article here. The U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, has seized control over America's rental housing stock, decreeing that landlords can no longer evict tenants who are unable to pay their rent. At least through the end of the year, landlords will have to allow their unpaying tenants to remain in place due to the Wuhan coronavirus pandemic, which, if Democrats get their way, will more than likely never end. Not only are landlords no longer allowed to evict unpaying tenants, but if they even try, then there will be federal criminal charges levied against them for ignoring tenant declarations made using CDC forms. It is unclear, to put mildly, exactly how this jurisdiction over private contracts in state local courts flows even into Congress, much less an administrative agency acting on its own, writes Jeff Deist of the Mises Institute. One federal official justifies the bizarre and legally dubious action based on the CDC's broad charter to stop the spread of communicable diseases, a charter at which they failed miserably with COVID. What we know is that the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees the CDC, has been granted broad powers by Congress that allow for the reasonable efforts to combat the spread of communicable diseases. That apparently now means controlling private housing. The CDC rationale is that if tenants get kicked out over their rental homes, then they will either become homeless or congregate at overcrowded living facilities or homeless shelters. This, the agency claims, is a potential recipe for a big spread of COVID-19. This is all part of the Democrats' plan to escalate more chaos following the November 3rd election. The CDC now acting by administrative decree, no congressional input necessary. In making this decision, the CDC relied on itself with no input from Congress or any other entity or agency. In other words, the CDC is now its own de facto government, which is truly unprecedented. Keep in mind that the earlier eviction moratoriums came with limits typically applied only to federally backed rentals and mortgages. The new CDC eviction moratorium appears to be across the board, applying to all private residential leases across America. The fallout from suspending rental contracts will be deep and long-lasting, Deast adds. Many landlords will find their situations untenable and stop making mortgage and property tax payments. Now rental housing stock will be depressed as owners worry about the next suspension of rent payments and how that precedent has been set. After all, why would moratoriums happen again if the next pandemic or financial crisis hits? Rental housing units will drop in price as more landlords abandon the business, setting the stage for commercial and private equity buyers to grab units on the cheap from individuals and small owners. In the end, the big guys will come up owning more property and more assets than they already do, and millions more Americans will be plunged into poverty and servitude. This is little more than a permanent consolidation of the renter class, it turns out, and has only just begun. Do not forget that the CDC is actually a private corporation, no different than Amazon or Apple. What that means is that a large multinational is now calling the shots in lieu of the actual government, meaning we are now under a total private dictatorship. The effects of the moratorium undoubtedly will spill over into an unforeseen ways, and Americans get used to the idea that their financial obligations can be erased by state edict, Deast warns. Well, like I said, this is not a cut and dried issue, and it's very perplexing that a private entity like the CDC now has this type of power. That's what I think, but I want to know what you think. Please leave a comment in the comment box below. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for coming along to my video, and we'll see you in the next one. God bless.